Hi there. In the last video we got our Markov model set up ready for doing a probabilistic sensitivity analysis. You'll recall that we had this PSA switch. When the PSA switch is set to 0, then our parameters are all going to take their deterministic values and the model is always going to give the same results. Whereas if you switch the PSA switch to 1, then every time this runs it's going to have different parameter values and it's going to give different results, and we can see those here. When we press F9 we get different results each time. Okay, in order to get Excel to repeatedly do that refresh and then take the results and record them, we need to use some VBA code. So VBA is Visual Basic for Applications. It's fairly simple programming language, not that powerful, but it does the job in this case. But in order to be able to use it, you may need to do this first. So we're going to open up the Excel options, go to the Customize ribbon and check this developer thing here. Once you do that, you'll see that you've got an extra tab here that then lets you do Visual Basic. Okay, and that's the one that we're going to be looking at. So if you click on that, you've now got this Visual Basic for Applications window. Okay, and what we're going to do is insert a module. So I right click on my project, insert a module. Great. So here is where we can start writing the code for our probabilistic sensitivity analysis. First thing that I would recommend you do is put option explicit. That just helps you avoid certain errors. It's not going to catch everything, but hopefully it will help you out. And then we're going to start a subroutine, which we can call something like run PSA. It will automatically give us that end sub. And then what will happen is when we're in Excel and we say run the macro run PSA, it's going to do everything between this line and then stop. Okay, but what do we actually want it to do? We want it to calculate what's going on in the model. Make sure before we do that actually that the PSA switch is set to 1, and then it's going to repeatedly recalculate, copy the results onto our PSA results sheet, and then move on. Okay, so first of all let's handle setting that PSA flag. And the code that we're going to write to do this is that we want to look at the range, which is the control sheet, and then the cell with the name PSA. We want to change its value to 1. And then at the end of the PSA, we're going to want to change it back to 0. So that's just a nice bit of tidying up that we're going to do. We don't want Excel to be recalculating all the time. We want to have control over how it's calculating. And so we need to change an option for that. So we go application.calculation equals, and then it will give us the 3 options that we can set this to. So by default it's going to be this one, Excel calculation automatic, but we want to change it to Excel calculation manual. And then again at the end we're going to change it back, because there's nothing worse than realizing that something's been switched to manual calculation and you've been copying values here, there and everywhere, and actually they're not correct because it hasn't done a refresh. Right, and then our fundamental approach is going to be to say application.calculate. Every time we do this it's going to recalculate the whole of the workbook. And then we're going to do something like range, so our destination dot value 2, and I say value 2 here because that just copies the value strictly without trying to do anything clever with it. Sometimes if you have currencies or dates and you use just value, they can end up copying incorrectly. So I would actually more or less just always use value 2. And we're going to have something which is like range destination.value2 equals range source.value2. Okay. And then we're going to wrap this in a for loop. And we're going to have for some number I going from 1 to n, do these things. And then next I. Now it's going to complain if you try to do this because you haven't told it what sort of variable I is, what kind of variable n is. So we'll do that up here. So we're going to say I is an integer and we're going to say n is an integer. Okay, and now we actually need to change these bits so that they work properly, and we're also going to record this I in that first column. So if I go back here to the PSA results, we want I to be recorded in this column, and then all these other bits are going to be copied to the appropriate row one by one. Okay, so let's start by putting I in where we want it to go. So it's going to be on the PSA results sheet. And on that sheet, it's going to be the cell of I plus. So we're going to start at 1, but we want it to go into the 4th row straight away. So it's going to be I plus 3, and it's the first column. Okay, so if we run this, what it should do is it's going to try to run this for I equals 1 to n, but I haven't even told it what n is, so let's just start off by saying n is 10 there. And I'm just going to comment that line out so you can do a single quote, and that will mean that Excel ignores the rest of what's on that line. Now, hopefully, when I run this, it's going to do the numbers 1 to 10 in that first column like we want. So, yeah, just had a little error in there. So instead of having range, we need to say sheets. And then when you run it, it should work. There we go. So we got our values 1 to 10 like we wanted. That's good. And now we want to get in some more things. So, okay, this is how we're going to code that. So we'll say the sheet that we're looking at is still PSA results. And now we're going to look at a particular range, which is B3 to J3. So if you have a look here, that's B3 to J3. But then we're going to offset it by a certain amount to get to the row that we want. So we're going to go down by I rows, but we're not going to move any columns. And we're going to say that the value of that is equal to the same thing, but without the offset. So now we're going to refer to these actual numbers. Okay, so that was that line that we've just written. And if we press run, then you'll see that we now have our parameters have copied in nicely, our results have copied in nicely. Fantastic. So this is our PSA code. You can change this number here. So you can say, actually, I want to do 100, run it. Now we've got 100. If you say do less than 100, you're first going to have to clear out everything that was there before, because otherwise you're going to keep the ones that were there that aren't being overwritten. There are a few other things that you can do to slightly speed up how this works. So one of those is that you will tell Excel not to bother refreshing the screen as it's working. So you can say screen updating equals false before you go into your loop, and then afterwards you can say put the screen updating back on. That will speed it up a bit. When you do that, particularly if n is a large number, you might want to give some kind of status updates, which will still show even when you have screen updating set to false. So you'll quite often see code which does something like application.statusbar equals reached iteration and I, and so this will just join together this string on the left, reached iteration, and the value of I. Now if I run that and go back to Excel, you'll see that it's saying reached iteration 100. That's nice. I probably don't need to see that now. So at the end you'll go application.statusbar equals false, and then that will clear the status bar at the end. So now the status bar is back to what it would usually be. You can, in here, you can run that. That will rerun. You could also, if you want, go into here on this sheet and say, let's have a big button that's going to run the PSA. Now when somebody clicks on that, it's going to run the PSA. Another thing that you might want to do is give somebody control over this value from the control worksheet, but I can leave that as an exercise for you to do. The main thing to be picking up from this is that this is how you get the code running fast, by setting the calculation mode to manual, turning off the screen updating, and then doing this method of copying. So sometimes this gets taught that you record a macro and then you copy and you paste values. Using the clipboard like that will slow your macro down quite a lot. So this is how you get a fast macro to do your probabilistic sensitivity analysis. Thanks.